Good day and welcome. I'm going to be talking now about The Black Company, which is a series of books that was originally published in 1984. And the series itself is currently 10 books long and going through the year 2000. The Black Company is pretty much considered the granddaddy of the grimdark genre. In 1984, you didn't see a lot of books a lot of fantasy books with anti-heroes in them. Anti-heroes were fairly common in the cyberpunk genre, which was really in its heyday at the time, but that hadn't really bled over to fantasy, which is one of the reasons why The Black Company is a significant work. There are some earlier fantasy works with anti-heroes in them, which we may talk about later, but for now, you've got the Black Company. And in addition to being anti heroes, one of the more interesting things about this is that there are a lot of shades of gray. Now, given current trends in books and writing, having a fantasy series with a bunch of characters who are anti heroes and as well a lot of shades of gray in the various characters isn't really a big deal. But in 1984, it was something pretty different. Um, the books themselves follow the Black Company as in their service to the lady, who is a evil empress who was raised from the dead after being killed, not completely killed, 370 years ago, and rescued, so to speak, by a wizard. Um, some of the other main characters, some of the main factions in play. You have the lady who's running the empire. You have the rebels who are allegedly fighting against the lady, but really aren't particularly wonderful people. And then you have the Dominator, who is the lady's husband, who was also entombed 370 years ago, but was not raised at the same time as the lady was raised. So there's a lot of tension where the Dominator's trying to come back, and the Black Company serves the lady who's, well, not clear if she's the least bad of the three alternatives, but she's certainly better than the Dominator. So they're serving her, and then is prophecies around the White Rose, who will overthrow the lady. So the first book really deals with the Black Company coming up to the north and serving the lady and helping to break the rebellion. The Black Company itself they're not what you would call a typical fantasy group of sellswords. They tend to be very modern in their outlook and use a lot of psychological tricks and ploys to try and win battles without fighting. So sometimes when you read it, it's a little bit hard to read it from that perspective. But on the other hand, any book is going to be written in the time that it's written. So unless we're going to start reading, you know, medieval novels, we're not going to really have a sense of the actual perspective. And it's a simple fact of life that the heroes and archetypes are all remade in their own way. If you to pick, for example, the story of Robin Hood, who in the 1950s was Errol Flynn, and he had certain traits assigned to him, and then Kevin Costner played him in the early 90s, and there's probably been Robin Hood remakes since then. And every Robin Hood is one of those archetypes that every generation repurposes to pick pieces from their tale that support the current view of the world. That's one of the reasons why it's difficult to read books that are kind of out of your era. If you're reading a book from the 19th century, they're going to have very different views on pretty much everything. They're also going to have very different vocabulary, word style selection, etc. But anyway, back to the Black Company, which is what seems to be like a group of guerrillas um, who are fighting a war in a fantasy land in service of someone who's evil. And the Black Company itself is interesting because the characters themselves, the narrator, Croker, who's the physician, has certainly done a lot of bad things, but he doesn't. He tries to be a better person, and there's a number of people in the Black Company itself who make no attempt whatsoever to be better people. At least that's the way the narration describes it. But at the end of the day, the company does redeem itself. So that being said, the first book of the Black Company, is just the basic. Okay, here's the initial round of service. Um, as you start to read more books, the narrative drifts a bit and tends to get fairly strange. I'm usually pretty comfortable reading the first book, and I feel like you know, it's a good story. You want to learn more about the characters. The characters are by no means good people that you would want to be friends with, but they're interesting characters living in interesting times with interesting things happening to them. And the story is something you want to read more about. As you start to get into later books, the author has a problem with what I call kind of losing control of the narrative. Because of the nature of this world, wizards are wizards or magic users are extraordinarily powerful, and as such, they're extraordinarily difficult to kill. Which means that since all three sides have very powerful wizards, none of the main protagonists and antagonists die. They just you think they die, and then they come back, and as that keeps happening, it starts to get just a little ludicrous, and then because people are constantly coming back and not dying and have to be vanquished again, and there's these building of grudges, the story just kind of spins a little bit out of control, and it starts to get, we'll just say, silly. As I said, I read the first book, very comfortable reading the first book. The second and third books, things get a little strange, but they're okay. The fourth book just again, the books just continue to get stranger and stranger. I think I've read up through the sixth, seventh book maybe, and towards the end, the narrative just kind of keeps getting out of control because there's all these powerful wizards that will come in for a little while, and then because they can't die, they're vanquished and they're not really a factor. But then they come back and they continue to be a factor, and there's kind of too many people there. So, is the book worth reading? Yes, the book is worth reading. Um, are all 10 of the books worth reading? It depends. I mean, if you really enjoy the first book and you're willing to kind of accept that things just get a little bit out of control, then they are worth reading. Is this book important? Yeah, this is really where the grimdark genre in fantasy drew its origins from. So overall, highly recommended. I think it's still worth reading, even 40 years old. And thank you. Appreciate your time and listening this long, and I will talk to you later.